Good evening and welcome everyone to our conference for the Anthroposophical Society in Southern Africa. We are exploring the foundation stone, and we've been going through a series of interviews over the last couple of Mondays where we're getting in touch with all different aspects, different people who have been working with the stone in different ways, the foundation stone verse, I should say. And we're up to session 6 now. We've got one more next week where we're going to share some interesting aspects and whatever we feel like we haven't gone in enough detail about, but also ask you what you've gained from these few weeks, how you plan to take it forward in your life. So it's going to be a really interesting and interactive session next week. But for today, we have our special guest, Cyril Coetzee, with us. He is formerly a published art historian and has been a practicing artist since 1990. Cyril is best known for his portrait of Nelson Mandela, which was reproduced on an international postage stamp, and for his 28 square meter painting, which is in the William Cullen Library at Wits University. He also has a lifelong interest in anthroposophy. And this really comes across. I've had the privilege of hearing Cyril of you talk many times. So welcome tonight to this format. And we're going to be exploring, in particular, the picture that you contributed to Noy's book. So just to remind everyone, Noy wrote a book to celebrate the centenary of the founding of the Anthroposophical Society. It's a great book that talks about the founding of the society, but in relation to the foundation stone verse. If you do not have a physical copy, you're welcome to get in touch with us so we can send you an electronic version. So just send an email to myself or to Noy. And in there is an excerpt from Cyril and the drawing that he's going to be sharing with us tonight. But Cyril, before we get into that, I wanted to ask what I've been asking everyone, is to share with us briefly the story of how you came to anthroposophy in general and into how you found the foundation stone in particular. So welcome.
Thanks very much to Lana for the introduction, and welcome to everyone. I appreciate us all being together. The question is, in brief, I met anthroposophy 45 years ago. When I was a schoolboy, I was, I think, in matric at school, I was 18 years old, so very close to my first moon node, and a few months away from my first moon node. And how it happened was I had a maths teacher in matric who got us to plot some graphs and so on, and I was very interested in how these graphs we were plotting resembled certain forms that I saw in nature. I was always drawing nature patterns of natural growth and so on. And I happened to say to him, this graph you've given us resembles an arum lily or something like that. And, he looked at me in a strange way. I wasn't at a Waldorf school, I have to say. He looked at me in a strange way and he said, oh, you should read Rudolf Steiner. And it came as a bit of a surprise to me when he said that, because the name sort of sounded a bit familiar, but there's no earthly reason why I would have heard it. And I just went to the public library in Grahamstown where I was at school, and I didn't really, it was a bit of a long shot that there would be anything about Steiner, but in fact there were 3 books there. One was Günter Wachsmuth's Introduction to the Life and Work of Rudolf Steiner, the second part. And then there were 2 other books, one by Canon Shepherd called A Scientist of the Invisible, and another one called Anthroposophy, an Introduction, lectures by Steiner, which were anything but an introduction, because they were given quite late in his life and presupposed quite a big knowledge of anthroposophy. But anyway, having said that, I took these books home and I opened Günter Wachsmuth's book that evening, and I saw a black and white reproduction of the first Goetheanum, which totally blew me away. I looked at it, and from then on, I was totally absorbed with the subject of Steiner and anthroposophy. So that, in a nutshell, is what happened. So I say that's about 45 years ago. But to answer your second question about the foundation stone in particular, not really something I thought very much about for quite a long time. I didn't meet any other anthroposophists for a good 4 or so years after 3 or 4 years after I started reading Steiner. But eventually, of course, like everyone in anthroposophy, I did come across the foundation stone. And at first, I think what really interested me about it was, the threefoldness of it, and the fact that so many things in anthroposophy relate to this threefoldness, and I was intrigued to find it all in a kind of summation in this meditation. But I didn't really work with the meditation until quite a lot later, when I discovered Prokofiev's book on the new mysteries, and that's when I became interested in it. It was about the time Prokofiev brought out that book on the new mysteries. I forget the full title of it. You'll know the one, published in a pink soft cover. Yeah, so that really then triggered me. And of course, I started becoming interested in the 4 mystery streams, and saw there was a connection between the 4 mystery streams and the foundation stone. But maybe I'll leave it like that, and then you can see if there's anything else more particular. I'm not sure what more to say on the topic.
No, I think that leads us nicely into your drawing that's been included in Noy's book.
Yeah, so I'll share screen now and see what happens.
And you're welcome to just start explaining it. And I mean, we've given you some idea of what we'd love you to cover, which is the description you gave around this drawing.
Yeah. I don't know if is it okay like that? Have you got? Can you also you see that? Okay, so
It's fine. Good.
You want it bigger?
It's
good. It's good.
It's fine.
You can go into presentation mode if you want, but it is pretty
I
good.
quite like having, let's just keep it like this.
It's great.
You'll see that what I've done is, look, it's nothing terribly, it's more of an illustration than it is really an artwork, I suppose. And Noy will confirm that it was done sort of in response to a question. Would I consider making some kind of drawing? And so that's what I did. And it really is, what was quite interesting for me was to link the idea of the 4 mystery streams to the idea of the etheric world cross. You'll remember from a few weeks ago when Estelle presented, a couple of weeks ago when Estelle presented, and she spoke about Zeilmans. She spoke a little bit about the etheric world cross and how Zeilmans had made the remark when he was in the Cape, that the Table Mountain was the foot of the world etheric cross, and that we could think of Dornach as the center of the world etheric cross. And you can look at my upper part of my drawing, you can see a sort of even armed cross, and then I've extended it down, as it were, to Cape Town. The southern mystery stream, the so-called Rosicrucian mystery stream, is given a kind of extension down to Table Mountain, giving you the base of the cross. So that's really the idea behind it. And hopefully, as I talk more about the 4 streams, that will become a little richer. You can see on the right-hand side, there's the Grail cup, which indicates the eastern stream, the so-called Grail stream. And then on the opposite side, there's a sword, which represents the Arthur stream from the west. And then at the northernmost point, I've just used the image of a flaming torch. I always associate the northern mysteries with flame. And I think because, they're essentially mysteries that have to do with the ego and with courage and so on. But I think before I go further with the drawing, I would like to just say at the outset that I think an issue that hasn't really been discussed in our meeting so far is the question of the relationship of the foundation stone to the so-called new mysteries. And with that, of course, the issue of what the old mysteries were and what the new mysteries are going to be. That's in the background of what I'm talking about. So Rudolf Steiner performed an esoteric deed, basically, in spiritually uniting the four ancient mystery streams, which have really run throughout the evolution. You can trace them through the evolution of Earth development all the way back, even to Hyperborean times, which is very, very, very ancient. You can, and I'll come into that. But I also just want to mention that the foundation of the new mysteries comes at the time of a coming together of four different things that are very important. One is the beginning. You know that we are now in the consciousness soul age, and Steiner said that the consciousness soul age started in the 15th century. And I think it's important to bear that in mind, that the central event of the consciousness soul age is really the so-called reappearance of Christ in the etheric, or the resurrection of Christ in the etheric, if you want to put it that way. Because Steiner mentioned that Christ had gone through a second crucifixion, which actually happened during the course of the 19th century, the latter part of the 19th century. And that just as he had died and resurrected on the physical earthly plane, during this period from the 19th century when the second crucifixion took place in the etheric, there is an etheric resurrection, or an etheric reappearance of Christ. And he sort of announced this around 1909, 1910. But he said that the real etheric resurrection or reappearance would only take place between 1930 and 1940, somewhere between. And this is not something that happens wham bam. It could happen gradually. But so this he said was the central event of the age of the consciousness soul. And I think much of when we try to fathom what the foundation stone is, it really hangs together with this question of the reappearance of Christ in the etheric. And the beginning of the Michael age, which started in 1879. So from 1880, you have the rulership of Michael taking over from Gabriel, so as a time spirit for the age. So that's very important too. And the end of Kali Yuga, the end of the so-called Dark Age, which comes about 1899. So for 1900, you have a birth of a new age of light. So all these things that I mentioned hang together with the new mysteries, the founding of the new mysteries, which of course happens from the point that the foundation stone is laid. Well, actually the burning of the first Goetheanum, strictly speaking. But the foundation for the new mysteries was already laid in 1913 with the building of the first Goetheanum. But of course, we get the foundation stone verse after the burning of the Goetheanum. So I wanted to say that, well, what was the role of the four mystery streams? Why are there four? You know, this is a key thing. And you can see how they fit onto the arms of a cross. So, you know, that begs the question why they're there. And if I go to this image, which is, of course, those of you who've read Bernard Leeuwenhoek's book on the mystery streams will probably remember this diagram, which shows you basically how from four directions, from east and west and north and south, over many centuries, you've got different spiritual impulses developing the different bodies of the human being. So the ego, the astral body, the etheric body, and the physical body are evolved over many thousands of years by different peoples of the earth from different directions. So for instance, you have in the east, you'll see there the post-Atlantean impulse, India, Persia, Chaldea, Greece, how this Grail stream develops, what Steiner called the Grail stream develops. And that all has to do with the with work on the astral body. So the astral body has to be prepared in this Grail stream for the time when Christ would incarnate at Golgotha. So that's the first thing to bear in mind. Then on the opposite side, you have the Hibernian stream, which comes from old Atlantis. It's even earlier, the origin of that. So when Atlantis went under, you have this so-called Arthurian stream, which the last vestiges of old Atlantis, of course, were Hibernia or ancient Ireland. And that becomes the source of the impulse for the so-called Irish Christianity and the Arthur stream. So that stream and the stream on the east meet each other and were joined together by an initiation act that was carried out by Parsifal. And this happened in the year 869, so in the 9th century. And it's underlying esoteric fact beneath the so-called Grail legends and so on that we know from around the 12th century, these Grail legends that spread, Wolfram von Eschenbach and various other writers who spread these Grail sagas. But underneath that, what happened in the 12th century was actually an esoteric deed that took place where this initiate Parsifal joined, who was also Mani, the initiate Mani, but as Parsifal joined these two streams together. And we can touch back on that, but it's very important to know that what Rudolf Steiner then does in the 20th century is he links two other much more ancient streams to these two. And one comes from the north and the other from the south. Now, the one from the north has to do with the ego and the preparation of the ego. It's very, very ancient. That's the oldest of all the mystery streams, of all four, because it goes right back to ancient Hyperborea. And you'll know that in the evolution of Earth, prior to, to the time of our time of earthly history, there was this Polarian period, then there was the Hyperborean period, and then there was the Lemurian period, and then the Atlantean period, and then the post-Atlantean epochs begin. So we're talking very big time scale. And you can see below you've got Lemuria, and this whole impulse comes that has to do with the physical body. So ego north, physical body south, astral body east, and etheric body west. But from this diagram, you can see he's also put in spirit self, life spirit, spirit man. And from that, you will understand that as human evolution takes its course, as the ego works down into the astral body is transformed, spiritualized, and part of it becomes spirit self, or what the ancient Eastern religions called manas. And as the ego works still further down into the etheric body, you have the development of buddhi or life spirit. And as it works even deeper down into the physical body, you have spirit man or atma. So that's the picture that that is given. And I'll just show you my little drawing. It's very crudely done, but I call it the Hebrew candlestick. But you may have seen something like it before. I just did it quickly with a pen because I thought it's useful to see how the first four bodies, starting from the left, physical body, etheric body, astral body, and then ego in the middle, metamorphose into the last. And this is really what you're seeing in these four mystery streams, is how this process over many, many centuries of a kind of metamorphosis of the lower into the higher. The lower four are transformed, and then you get the lower three are transformed, and you get the higher three. Yeah, so, and then of course you end up with this picture where, which Leverkut also gives us in his book. And I wanted to just say a little bit more about, to go back to this picture, the Arthurian stream originates in the sun oracles of Atlantis. And it really has to do with the those purified sun forces, life forces, that are then given to Christ to take on as an etheric body, as it were. when he descends. And you can see how it's almost as if humanity has to, like a cup, prepare for the descent of the macrocosmic ego, so that this macrocosmic ego can work into the microcosm and bring about for all humanity the possibility to to realize our higher potentials, manas buddhi atma. I just thought, the northern stream, the Hyperborean stream, was this polarity of Hyperborea and Lemuria was also known to the ancient Greeks under a different terminology. They spoke about the Apollo and Dionysus. So the Hyperborean mysteries really have to do with the head forces more, the upper part, the light pole of the human being. And now we start touching on things relevant to the foundation stone meditation, because of course the minute I say the upper pole has to do with the head forces, you think of the certainly one section of the foundation stone verse. And the lower part, the Lemurian, the Dionysian stream, has to do with the limbs, or to do with the earth, to do with the mysteries of the physical metabolic human being, which have to be purified too, of course. So the Greeks knew this polarity, and one of the highest teachings of the Greek mysteries in the late period was that ultimately Apollo and Dionysus are one. And so there we see the limb-head polarity in one form. But there's also a kind of limb-head polarity on the horizontal axis, but expressed in a different way. Because in one way, you can imagine there's a wisdom pole that has to do with the East. And you can think of in ancient East, in the yogas of ancient East, how over many, many centuries of the Vedas and yogic practice, how there was this looking back to the ancient past, that everyone was trying to return to Godhead, to go back to Godhead, to cut off this terrible descent into matter that human beings feared. Yoga was about reconnecting to where we've come from. And you'll see the yogic posture, of the asana, where the legs are folded, actually expresses this desire to cut off the limbs and to go back through the head, almost through the, what is it called, the fontanelle, to withdraw back to the spiritual place from whence we've descended. So those wisdom mysteries really have to do with going up, that way. If I go to the Germanic peoples, and you contrast the Germanic people with the Eastern people, you'll see the Eastern initiation streams were all about heredity, because the initiation impulse was carried in the hereditary stream. You had to be a certain kind of class to be in the priest class or whatever like that, and that was genetically determined. And you can see that carrying on for many, many centuries, that everything was determined genetically, had to be of the right stream of blood. But if you go to the Germanic peoples, it's quite the opposite. Here it's because it's an ego impulse. It's really about the person who's most courageous in the tribe who becomes the new leader, becomes the new king. So it's got nothing to do with genetics at all. It's an ego impulse, highly individualistic. And of course, the Germanic people didn't, they didn't sort of withdraw into a temple. They did brave and courageous things, like at the Externsteiner in Paderborn, where you had to cross these flaming bridges and prove yourself in terms of deeds. So it's all about the limbs, all about the will, you know what I mean? So having said that, you've got a pretty good sense of that. Think of the Vikings too, and all these Norse people who really had as their task, Steiner calls them the waiting culture, because they had to wait a very long time, being the oldest of all the mystery streams. they've had to wait right up until now, till the consciousness soul time, for that stream to really come into its own. And Steiner says the task of this northern stream now is really to develop the future world economy. And you think of the business people, the Hansa League, and all the business people who are involved in developing, through presence of mind and through courage, developing the economic system of a world economy of the future. And this comes under attack too. You can see with something like the World Economic Forum, which is seeing operative in the world now. This is not the way it's meant to be going, because the ego forces, the lower ego forces, are still very active there. But we're talking about a future time when these lower ego forces are overcome, and the ego can be put in service of a world economic stream of a totally different kind. So there's that. And then the Southern Mysteries are very interesting. I just wanted to show you this map. It's a kind of speculative map that came about, I've shown it to one or two of you before, came about in the time of Ernst Haeckel, the Darwinist. And you can see in this Pacific Polynesian, Micronesian area down below, between Africa and India and Australia, and all those islands around Australia, this is the region known as, well, we in anthroposophy talk about as the site where ancient Lemuria had been. And you can see up near India, there's even a word there, paradise, on the map, suggesting that this is where the so-called fall from grace took place that we read in the Bible story. This time when the moon withdrew from the earth. All that unfolds in the division of the sexes and the great dinosaur era. All that happens when this was like the locus where everything was coming about in Lemuria. And then, of course, these Lemurians spread throughout that whole area. And you can see from this map, which is, of course, a little bit speculative, how some of them go into Africa, some of them go into Australia, and some of them go into the South Pacific Islands and so on. But it's interesting to get a handle on that, because when you look at this map, which was put together by Gunther Wachsmuth, you can see there's a continent he's drawn between North America, Africa, and South America. There's a continent there with various planetary oracles situated on it. The central one being a sun oracle, the northernmost one being a Jupiter oracle, a Saturn oracle, I beg your pardon. A Jupiter oracle, and the bottom one being like a Saturn oracle. And you can see how that movement across the north, that's the Atlantean continent. The movement across went to Ireland and then to England and so on. Another stream went across North Africa into Mongolia to the Gobi Desert. And so this is the way Wachsmuth put it together in conversation with Rudolf Steiner. Quite interesting to put that into a picture, because you can see that one stream comes really out of this Lemurian continent, another stream comes from Atlantis, another stream comes from Asia, more from the post-Atlantean time. And these northern mysteries, the Hyperborean ones, there's not much about them really, because they're so very, very ancient. But one can imagine, I know at the time of the ancient Greeks, that Greek initiates would travel to the north, right up to the north, as close to the North Pole as they could get, to try and meet with the Apollonian gods, who were thought to reside up there in the cold region of the north of the Arctic. Yeah, so just to say a little bit more now about the foundation stone verse, it's quite interesting that I know people ask, one of the things people ask is, what is the philosopher's stone? And how does the foundation stone that Steiner talks about, how does that differ from the philosopher's stone of the alchemist? What is the philosopher's stone of the alchemist? Excuse me, I just want to quickly think something.
So So while he's getting, I hope you guys are just making note of any questions that you have, because we'll have time later to ask Cyril.
Sorry about that. I just had to let the dog out.
Okay, carry on.
Yeah, so it's a very difficult question to answer. What was the Philosopher's Stone? But it seems to me that from indications from Steiner, the Philosopher's Stone has to do with the mystery of carbon. And you'll know that most of nature is built of carbon, as a fundamental building block of nature. And we have our physical carbon body, and we inhale oxygen and we breathe out carbon dioxide, and we know that to a certain extent we're poisoning the world by breathing out this carbon dioxide. And if it wasn't for the plants which then take it in and etc., there'd be a hell of a lot of poison out there. But also this nature of the darkening of the being of the human, this darkening of the human being, this becoming more stone-like, more earthbound through the fallout of the spiritual world, is a picture of descent. We become, and it's got to do with breathing too, because I know that even in the Eastern yogas, they talked about pranayama, the science of breath, whereby you could, through breathing in a certain way, stop exhaling this poison. And I know the Rosicrucians practice this too. Stop exhaling as much poison, change the breath so that your breath becomes a life force rather than a death force. So that whole impulse is also connected with the Eastern stream. And I know with the one of the things that Christ's deed is it is a how shall I say, it is a rejuvenation of the whole etheric world in such a way that we can etherize our blood and so on. The etherization of the blood that Steiner talks about has to do with the resurrection impulse of Christ. And so the Philosopher's Stone really has to do with overcoming the carbon body, or turning the carbon body into a diamond body. So the physical body ultimately becomes Atma, this highest of the bodies. And that really has to do also with the mystery of alchemy. So there's a connection between the Eastern stream and the Southern stream, just as there is between the Northern stream and the Western stream. And maybe some more of that becomes apparent as we go along. But if you go to some of the other pictures of the Philosopher's Stone of ancient times, another one is that the Philosopher's Stone is also the Grail, or the chalice. And this idea of the Grail as a stone that fell from the crown of Lucifer, that's an interesting picture. Because what is the stone that falls from the crown of Lucifer? Well, you know that Lucifer brings us freedom of thinking, that without Lucifer we wouldn't have free will or free thinking. And yet that got us into a lot of trouble, having the free thinking and the free will. So it's a stone that falls, but it's one that ultimately can be made, can be transformed to become, as it were, a cup, a receptacle, a vessel for the higher to come, for the higher ego to come into us. So there are all those mysterious things to do with the Philosopher's Stone and the Grail. But there's also this etheric stream that runs from the heart to the head, put into the human being, as it were, opened up in the human being by Christ, and a kind of union of love and wisdom in this stream between the chakras of the head and the heart, which is another picture of the Grail. In the Western Hibernian stream, you have this marvelous picture given in the lecture Steiner gave on the old Hibernian mysteries of Ireland. He gives this picture, you'll remember it, those of you who've read it, of these two statues that the initiate was brought up to. And one of them is an elastic male statue, and the other's a sort of plastic soft female statue. And the one statue has to do with head experiences. experiences that lead back to the pre-birth, the male one. And the female one has to do with will experiences, limb experiences that lead into the future. So there again, in the old Hibernian mysteries, you can see a link to this head and limb polarity that comes up in the foundation stone. So I think it's very interesting to now find, you won't find, if you look at the foundation stone and think because there are 4 verses, that each one must correspond to a different stream. Of course, it isn't like that, because the foundation stone unites all the 4 within it. But you're going to find in the foundation stone many links to the different streams. But it's not like the first verse is to do with the east and that one's to do with the west. It doesn't work like that. Just so in case you want to pursue that line of thinking. I don't know how much talking I should do and how much I should leave open, but I will just say from Zeilmans, maybe to conclude, I can just say that Zeilmans, in his little book on the foundation stone, makes interesting connections also to the alchemist and the foundation stone meditation. For instance, he points out that in the first verse, soul of man now liveth in the limbs, you have very much there something that has to do with how the alchemist understood the sulfur process. You know, they had this idea that the alchemical sulfur has to do with the limbs, the limb metabolic system of the human being, and how the alchemical sulfur is really the heavenly power of love working through the first hierarchy into the human being. So the alchemists knew all this. They had their own, as it were, version of that aspect of the foundation stone. Because when you get to the third part and it talks about the resting head, there you're talking about what the alchemists would have called a salt process, which has to do with the, you can even see that the brain itself is being surrounded by a skull. The skull is built up of sort of calcium carbonate and phosphoric material that, you know, is of a salt nature. And that really has to do with the power of thinking. And your head is kept, as it were, a resting head is kept in that position through the working of salt processes. And then you have the mercury element in the middle. So your middle verse of the first 3 has to do with alchemical mercury, which has to do with the beat of heart and lung. You know, one of the things about mercury is that it's twofold. It has this link to heart and to lung, to sun and to moon. Mercury bridges sun and moon, as it were, in itself. Even if you look at the symbol, you can see how there's a moon on top and the sun in the middle and a cross for the earth below. And it's these 2 qualities of sun and moon in a volatile beat of heart and lung that are held together in it. And it's continually imbued with the Christ will in the encircling round whole sway, as it were, in the rhythms of worlds. That is the nature of this mercury aspect of the old alchemists, where they spoke about alchemical mercury. In Christo Morimor, it has to do with that. So you can see in various of these mystery streams, there are links to the foundation stone. And the northern stream, very much in the last verse, where you are light divine, O Son of Christ, when you get to the end, and I know Estelle beautifully isolated that last line for us. I know she gave it a different rendition. I forget what it was. She'll have to remind us. But, you know, we would have said, well, certainly in the old 1957 translation, and from our heads direct with single purpose, the whole thing ends with purpose, you know, with courage, with a deed for the future. This is an impulse from the northern mysteries. Oh, light divine, you know, this is the Apollonian vision. It opens with this Apollonian picture, oh, light divine, and then you get this action of the deed of single purpose that we all individually have to bring. And that really has to do, yeah, with the northern stream. So I've rattled on for quite a long time. I thought there are 1 or 2 pictures here that you might just find interesting. Also, Zeilmans shows us this picture, which of course is Aristotelian in nature and has to do with the 4 elements and the 4 directions. And it also has to do with So you can see wet sits in the west, dry sits in the east, cold sits in the north, warm sits in the south. And there you have another aspect of the mystery streams. You know, the wet has to do with the etheric, the dry more with the astral, the cold has to do with the ego, and the warmth has to do with the physical. So there's that whole alchemical understanding of fourfoldness, and the alchemical understanding of threefoldness, sulfur, mercury, salt. And so you've got the 3 and the 4, which together form the foundation stone, as understood by the alchemists. And it's in this picture too. So you'll get above the 4 elements, starting on the right with fire, air, water, earth. Those triangles starting on the right, fire, air, water, earth. And then below that, these 3 alchemical substances, salt on the right, mercury, and sulfur. And you can see the 2 middle ones above also have to do with water and air, or with old sun and old moon, if you look at it in evolutionary terms, that come together in the mercury symbol. So yeah, there's alchemy very much in the foundation stone. I just wanted to show you this picture. You've seen pictures like this often, just to show you this closing in of the limbs in the Eastern Stream. This is a very, I'm almost saying, archetypal picture of the Eastern Stream in a way, of the ancient Eastern Stream, because it's to do with closing off the lower body and opening up all these chakras to the 1,000-petaled lotus flower. You know, that whole thing. The Grail stream, the Grail being a picture of how the spirit self will descend into will be formed out of the working of the astral body. So when we purify our passions, we purify our body of passions, catharsis, then we create an openness to spirit self. And that's really the Grail cup opening to the descent of spirit self. And this, of course, is fundamental to this meeting of the Arthurian and Grail streams in this deed of Parsifal that I spoke about. I thought I'd just show you these pictures. This one is a painting by Hans Thoma, which I think in a beautiful way captures also this, you know, these Knights of King Arthur. Steiner described the Knights of King Arthur, of the Arthur Stream, as Knights of the Sword, as opposed to the Knights of the Eastern Stream, of the Grail Stream, as being Knights of the Word. So Knights of the Sword, why were they Knights of the Sword? Well, think of the sword of Arthur, you know, the sword of Arthur that he pulls out of the lake. When it's handed to him by this hand that comes out of the Lady of the Lake. He's got the sword, and this is a sword of purification. He goes out, Arthur and the knights go out to purify the astral body, to tame the astral body, to tame the elemental forces around them. And that's a marvelous picture of that stream. And you can see there the link between the Western Stream, the Arthur Stream, and the Northern Stream in that. I thought I'd show you, it's not a very good reproduction, unfortunately, but Paderborn, the Extern Steiner, these stones in Germany with these bridges between them, where I imagine in the old initiation rites of the North, these were sometimes flaming bridges that were swinging, and you had to have the courage to cross from one to the other. So that was an initiation site of the Northern Mysteries. And of course, typically something quite different from the South, the great temple of Hatshepsut in Egypt, which is going deep into the earth. The Southern Stream has to do with the transformation of the physical body, with the spiritualization of the physical body, and with the spiritualization of substance, which is why alchemy came from ancient Egypt, because it all had to do with the transformation of substance. Yeah, so I think we'll leave it like that. And then there's a bit of time, isn't there, for discussion?
Yes, why don't you just show us your drawing again that was in the book,
sure.
Just as I think it would be a nice way to just.
Yeah, now you must remember, if I can just say as a postscript, that of course there were several European peoples that came down to South Africa who all in one way or another bring aspects of the Rosicrucian impulse to the Cape and to Johannesburg, and to what became Johannesburg or Gauteng. because you have that whole impulse around gold on a sort of materialistic level in Johannesburg, the impulse of the search for gold. But you also have much earlier the Templar order, which in Portugal metamorphosed into the Order of Christ. And so people like Francisco de Almeida, Vasco da Gama, Bartholomew Dias, these Portuguese navigators at the beginning of the 15th century, who traveled around the Cape for the first time to find the sea route to India, but also to find Prester John. That's very interesting, because remember that John was the disciple who stood at the foot of the cross. He was the only one who was consciously standing, witnessing the crucifixion at the foot of the cross. And Steiner says this whole southern stream is also a Johannine stream of Christianity, will come out of the south. And we have that very much in southern Africa, even with the black people, with all the churches centered around St. John. I encountered it in Johannesburg, talking to Zionists and people like that, how strong this theme of John is in southern Africa, and of course to Ethiopia. So there's that whole thing. But of course, importantly, the Portuguese navigators were Templars. They were alchemists. They were alchemists, and they brought the first ships around the Cape Point, and the Dias crosses were put at various points on the coast. And then, of course, the Dutch came, and there was a strong Rosicrucian impulse with the Dutch, with Simon van der Stel and so on. And then when the English came, you of course have the people of the consciousness soul. Par excellence, the English are the people of the consciousness soul. And so they have to bring that. And interesting that the shadow of this is in the search for the gold and so on. Anyway, having said that, you can see why this Rosicrucian stream belongs so much to the foot of the World Cross, and the picture of Table Mountain as a kind of altar on which this cross rests. You know, it's interesting, Steiner also said that when you travel to the west from the center, when you travel to the west, you're heading in the direction of Ahriman. The Ahrimanic forces get stronger. And bear in mind that Ahriman attacks the etheric body. When you travel to the east, you're traveling in an astral direction. And of course, then Lucifer attacks your astral body. Perhaps it's true that if you travel to the north now, well, I don't want to go there, but I think there's an interesting mystery there to do with east and west. And you might say, well, where does west stop? You know, can't you just keep going round? But of course, I want to say that the earth has a face. And that in the age of relativity, people won't accept that. They think you can turn the world map upside down and it's arbitrary which end of the world is up and which is down. It's a convention of cartographers. I'd like to say that that's not true. Spiritually, that's not true. That the top of the map is appropriately the northern hemisphere and the south, because actually the forces of the jaw, you know, the forces of the jaw belong with Dionysus in the south, and the forces of the upper head belong in the north. The earth has a face. The face there's the face of the earth, and the center point of the mystery of Golgotha was the mystery point of the center of the cross, perhaps for the physical crucifixion of Christ. But we have to look more to Dornach to understand the second resurrection, the etheric Christ. So I think that the locus moves a little bit. Just some post thoughts, but really I'll stop now. And
thank you.
Thank you very much.
So while people are just formulating their questions or comments, maybe I can just ask you to end off this part with telling us what verse or line stands out for you or has personal significance and why.
Yeah. Well, I'm not very original in this because I think other people say exactly the same thing. I'm a great lover of the fourth verse. You know, where the verse actually becomes a prayer, O light divine, O Son of Christ. That's really my favorite part of the verse. And for good reason. You know, I think it brings something modern, something very much of the present. You know, I think Rosicrucianism already had the mysteries of the first three verses to some extent. But something is now added to Rosicrucianism by this addition of these two other streams coming together. And I love the fourth verse. I mean, I also love the, you know, the three great, I love the three great faculties of spirit recollection, spirit mindfulness, and spirit vision. That's also very wonderful, just to take that out and think about these three things and what they are, perhaps in relation to imagination, inspiration, intuition. That's very interesting. But as a verse, I like the fourth verse. It speaks to me and I use it a lot.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks for sharing. So we'll open now to see if there's any questions or comments. I'm not sure if you want to keep sharing your screen, if maybe we can come back if the question leaves us. But are there anyone that has any questions or comments? Anything you'd like to add or ask, Cyril? If you could raise your hand in some way so that I could find you. This is a chance for us to just discuss what we've heard. Yeah.
I see.
Yes,
Grant. I think.
Just got to unmute yourself, Noy. Thank you.
Yes. There is a reference by Rudolf Steiner to one of the 10 commandments, thou shalt not kill, going back to ancient India and the yogi who would sit in his cave and meditate. And through this meditation, he would purify the air that he breathes out. Mm. So not killing with his breath.
Mm. Yeah, pranayama. Thank you.
And then kind of off the point, but did your maths teacher become an anthroposophist?
You know, it's interesting you say that. Many years later, I saw him. And he was an old man. It was, I don't know how many years later, he was an old man already. And I went up to him and I said, do you remember me from your matric class? And he didn't really, he looked a bit vague. And then he said, oh yeah. And I said, you know, you mentioned this guy, Rudolf Steiner, to me. What do you know about Rudolf Steiner? And he said, I actually don't know anything about him really, but there was a maths teacher at a previous school I worked at, a German woman, who once mentioned to me the interesting work Rudolf Steiner did with mathematics in relation to plant forms and things like that. So he didn't really know anything. He was just a link.
All right.
Funny, huh? How things work.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah.
Funny thing is, he looked a bit like Rudolf Steiner. You know, his face resembled Rudolf Steiner. But I only realized that later.
Cyril, it's Annalisa here. I just want to say what a gift it's been to listen to you. I could just listen to you for another hour. It's just been so illuminating. You've just, you've just clarified so many thoughts and so many streams of thinking that has come together in a unity. And I just wanted to let you know how much I appreciate.
Well, yeah, thanks.
Just your current understanding of so many things. Thank you so much.
Thanks
really.
very much. Yeah.
Yes.
So thanks, Cyril. It's so interesting what you were. I mean, well, thank you for everything, but in particular, you were saying about the spirit recollection, spirit mindfulness. I will truly feel spirit vision. Speaking and it's quite interesting. There's like a little bit of an overlapping with the Eightfold Path, not in its entirety, but you know, the right view, right thought, word, deed, action. There's a bit of an overlap, isn't there, in the foundation stone? Those are the 4 aspects.
Mm.
Of course, the Eastern Eightfold Path has 8, and this
Yeah.
has.
Yeah, I mean, it is quite. I was thinking about the Eightfold Path the other day in connection with the 7 life processes, because it seems that, and I'm not going to go into this now, but you can look into it. There's some quite interesting stuff on the net. If you go into that anthroposophical 7 life processes, the middle one actually splits into 2. And there are 2 qualities related to the middle one, the light, which is to do with the sun. And you can find your Eightfold Path very much also in how the Buddhists worked with the 7 life processes. I'm just giving you that because it comes, I think it's a clearer indication out of anthroposophy of what to work with. But of course, it has to do with the 16 petal chakra as well, because, you know, we're developing the 8 petals now for the future. But at the time of the Buddha, there were these 8 petals that also had to be developed on the 16 petal chakra. So it has to do with that. So if you go back to Knowledge of Higher Worlds and read about the 16 petaled lotus flower, he actually mentions there the Eightfold Path of the Buddha. So just to give you that as a possible thing to, if you want to pursue that in what the anthroposophical understanding of the Eightfold Path is, it's quite interesting to look up those 2 things, 7 life processes and that reference in the Knowledge of Higher Worlds. I mean, I think these 3, spirit recollection, spirit mindfulness, spirit vision, have a slightly different, we must understand them in a slightly different way. And I mean, I'm sure many people here in this conference can talk for hours about that, because it really has to do with, you know, these 3 higher faculties that we have to develop, that have to do with transforming thinking, transforming feeling, and transforming the will. So, you know, but I mean, that's enough. I think there'll be other things too. You can work with that.
So are there any other questions? The one question I thought, or just to ask, if you could also maybe, just like you've given an overview there, was you mentioned at the end of last week's session the link with the foundation stone and the 5th gospel. We haven't had a chance to go in there, so I don't know if you can just briefly just mention.
Well, I mean, I'm a bit,
to
tell you the truth, I'm a bit rusty on the 5th gospel, which is why we've now started reading it in our group. But we're right at the beginning. What I do recall that is interesting is, you know, there's obviously these 2 streams, the shepherds and the kings, which come up in the last verse here. You know, the warmth and the light. And you know that central to the 5th gospel is this idea that 2 totally different Jesus children had to prepare for the Christ to incarnate. And one of them is the wisest soul in the evolution of humanity, the wisest soul being the Solomon soul, which you read about in the Matthew Gospel. So Jesus wasn't an uncommon name at that time. So it's not too far a stretch of the imagination to imagine that there were these 2 Jesus children. And the Matthew Gospel talks about this Solomon child, but the Luke Gospel actually talks about a completely innocent soul, one that's never incarnated before. So you've got the wisest soul of evolution and the most innocent soul, the purest soul, a new soul, as it were. And this is very much to do with this polarity of light and warmth, as I understand it. You know, because of the 2 stories, there's the king story, the kings and the shepherds in the mystery plays. The kings have to do with the Solomon stream, and the shepherds have to do with the Nathan or Luke child, the Nathan soul or the Luke child. So they come together, the merging of the glory of eternity with the masterpiece of time, as Arthur Balfour put it. And he wasn't an anthroposophist, but he had an intuitive understanding that there's this masterpiece of time, this wisest of beings, and then this other being which springs, as it were, from eternity. And somehow this coming together of time and eternity prepares the cup, you know, for this 3rd cosmic Christ to then descend at the baptism in the River Jordan. So there's only that period of 3 years from the baptism in the River Jordan to the crucifixion where Christ is actually really present in a physical body. And the death of Jesus on the cross is actually the birth of Christ into the earth. No, this is not the birth of Jesus. The birth of Christ into the earth happens with the death of Jesus on the cross. And the beginning, and the baptism in the River Jordan is like a conception before, in a pregnancy. And these 3 years are the gestation period where, as it were, where Christ is actually active in the body of Jesus. And it's much more complicated because there are many, many other aspects to it, but that's sort of in summary what the fifth gospel presents. And Steiner says the fifth gospel is very important because it's now, we had 4 gospels, he said, which came from the east. He says from the east. And this is now the gospel from the west. And it has to do with an understanding, a conscious understanding of Christ, not just Christ taken in through the will and through the feeling, but Christ taken in through the thinking and understood for the first time. So in a way, it's a kind of a Whitsun picture of Christ that we get from the fifth gospel. Anyway, maybe that helps. But I mean, the ancient Kabbalists knew about this as well, because they also spoke about 2 Adams, and and there's the whole, this thing of the 2 Jesus children. You see it in a lot of paintings as well. And in a lot of early paintings, people think that one of the Jesus children is John the Baptist. But there are actually certain paintings which depict the 2 Jesus children as such. Yeah. Steiner also talks about the Zarathustra stream and the Buddha stream, as 2 great streams in evolution. And the third stream kind of brings them together. So maybe that's another aspect you can bring to it, the Zarathustra stream, which has to do with the macrocosm, and the Buddha stream, which has to do with the microcosm, as far as I understand.
Grant?
Yes, thank you, Cyril. Oops, what happened? Something's happened.
Carry on.
You spoke about the Arthurian stream and the sword, and the Grail in the east. And
Yes.
I'm just asking, why does one always think of the Knights of the Grail, which would make you think that the Arthurian stream has to do with the chalice and...
Well, because the 2 were joined by Parsifal.
Okay.
So from the deed of Parsifal, which is to join the 2 together, the Knights of Arthur are also Knights of, they become one and the same.
Yes.
They join together then.
Thank you.
Yeah. And actually, Parsifal actually travels from the east to the west, bringing the cup. No, he doesn't. That was somebody else, Joseph of Arimathea. But in any case, the 2 streams were actually very much united apparently in Britain.
Yes. Thank you.
Is there anything else? Does anyone else want to ask a question or add something?
Martin, is your hand up?
His glasses are up.
He's mute.
Ah,
He's mute.
Estelle's asking.
Yeah, just to say about that last, can you hear me properly?
Yes.
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 Oh, good. That last line of the foundation stone, anyone who heard Zalman say it would never forget it, because it has a different quality altogether. And I think if we use both those, from time to time, it gives a different quality. That means we, not with single purpose, which is somehow this way, but we have the will. It's quite
there
different.
You see
Try
very
it
much
as well.
Yeah. There you see the northern stream
Yeah.
kicking in the present day very strongly. Well, the way you put it now, even with the fist, you know.
Yeah.
The flaming bridges.
But I see it in another way, that the purpose comes in a way from the thinking, and the will is you know, we walk straight, so you better get out the way. That's sort of
Yeah.
Actually, I was thinking about that today. Actually, those, what is it, 8 lines at the end. You know, it moves from you know, to it really moves between head, heart, and hand. And it's possible. I off the top of my head, I don't know if I can come to that now, but you know, like divine, you sort of feel you're looking up some here. By Simon Price, you're going to the heart, and you stay in the heart in the next line, warm thy heart, and then you go back up to the top again in the 4th line to the head. And then when you come to the 5th line, that good may become united in the will, down in the limbs. What from our hearts we would found, from our heads direct, with single purpose, you're back in the limbs again. So there's this movement, interesting weaving, you know, of head, heart, heart, head. Perhaps heart, head.
purpose is actually a thinking thing.
Yeah, well, anyway, you can think about it. But it's quite beautiful the way weaving between head, heart, and limbs. You know, and it all weaves together in that last verse. Beautiful.
Well, super, Cyril, there's been a lot of thank yous from everyone in the chat, and that when I get the download, I'll send them to you. A lot of people thanking you for your time and your reflection. So just one last, is there anything else anyone wants to say? Otherwise, I'm going to stop the recording part, and then we can carry on talking. Any other last questions or comments?
I could just say something.
Yes.
Cyril, I was really moved by your opening, that this is really the joining of these 4 mysteries.
Oops.
Oh dear, it looks like she's just lost power.
Yeah, I'm glad that she brings that. I know exactly what she's going to say. She's going to say that, you know, I put down a question, what are the new mysteries as opposed to the old mysteries? And I never really quite encapsulated that. But I suppose it has to do with the mysteries of wisdom becoming the mysteries of love, and the mysteries of wisdom becoming the mysteries of will. You know, so I think, I don't want to say too much, but I know this is a big theme, that in the past, mysteries tended to be about will and about wisdom. And now, you know, we're turning a planet of wisdom into a planet of love. And that's really where the new mysteries come in. Because love is something you have to do. You know, it's got to do, it's greater than compassion. You know, in the lecture Steiner gave from Buddha to Christ, he points out there's a big difference between having compassion for people and having love for them, because you have to go a step further in love than you go in compassion. Compassion, you're still sitting out there, I feel for those people, you know, but it's not the same as sacrificing yourself for them or being completely at one with them, you know what I mean? So there's this movement from wisdom to compassion to love, you know, and I think the new mysteries are very much to do with doing and to do with loving, as opposed to sitting in a monastery somewhere and reflecting, or, you know, being outside of the world.
Could I just also add that the first 3 verses of the foundation stone are addressed to the human soul, you. And in the last one, it becomes we. Right. In the last, the 4th verse, it becomes not you, but we.
Yeah, our hearts, our heads, yeah.
Yeah. So is there anything else, or any other questions or comments as we about to stop the recording part of tonight? Doesn't look like it. Just checking everyone. Well, then just to thank you again, Cyril, for sharing. We will continue the discussion in a moment, and that next week will be our last to conclude this conference and just bring everything we've been learning together and looking how we can all take it forward in our lives. So we look forward to seeing you next week. Until
Thank you
then,
very
have
much.
a good week.
Thank you.